Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today, on our Retirement Readiness Thursdays, we will discuss the retirement plan for a 45-year-old. And this time will be slightly different. There's a couple things that we'll focus on. Number one is, what if I'm starting with $0, right? What would that look like? How could I achieve my retirement goals at 45? Is 45 too late? And it always depends. But we'll go through a case study where you can see how it's possible. Number two, we're all concerned and trying to figure out this whole inflation, market volatility. What does that look like as far as my investment plan? And how can I make sure that I maintain the goals that I need? Sure, it's fine to say, hey, I'm going to get a certain percentage return every single year, but what if that doesn't happen? And what does that look like for my overall retirement plan? And they'll answer a variety of different questions along the way. If you have any, you could just put them in the comments and I would answer them for you. And I will go ahead and get started. My apologies for being a little late. I could not get any video to work, right? So I have my normal video that we're looking at. I was able to restart my computer and get it to work. And then I have my backup camera, and that one wasn't even working for me. And I almost was like, man, it just isn't the day for me. And so I was gonna chalk it up to the game, but I ended up saying, you know what, let's just restart the whole computer. We got absolutely nothing to lose. So let's go for it. And so we'll go through this retirement plan. I'll show you what it looks like for someone that's starting with nothing. And we'll see how we're able to achieve the overall goals that we have designed for ourselves, everything that you can imagine. We'll go through that. And then if I miss anything, just ask in the comments. So first and foremost, let's get started with what our net worth is. We normally always start with there. So we have 64,000 in the bank account. We have a home that's worth about 800,000. You see, we have credit cards, so we don't have a lot of credit card debt, so that's a good spot to be in. And then we have the mortgage that's about 420,000, student loans about $40,000 still left, giving them a net worth of 401,000, about $400,000. When you're normally looking at these plans, we normally have, a good amount of money that's invested in our overall assets. And as you see, we have nothing that's invested. And that's important to keep in mind for a variety of reasons. I will say that for the most part, there's a couple things we're going through. Number one is we're really focused on the here and now. Maybe we have kids, we have bills, we have so many moving pieces. We're trying to figure out this whole life thing. And at many times, the idea of investing for the future, it feels so far down the road that it's almost difficult to even comprehend and wrap our mind around. And that's why as a goal-based planner, I always focus on what does that dream retirement life look like. And as you know, retirement isn't as sexy of a word. And I'm just gonna keep using it. I know we use financial freedom, I can appreciate that, but financial freedom is retirement. That is what retirement is your financial freedom. It's the ability to purchase all of our time. That there's a point of our life where we can remember having all of our time, but we had no money. So we either were very young and we had lived at the home with our parents. Maybe we just started college and we had a whole lot of time, but we didn't have a lot of money. And we were trying to balance out what am I going to do? And most of the time we said, I gotta get to work because I don't have any money to enjoy my time. And then somewhere along the way, we start generating the income, but we've lost track of the time. Like we don't have as much of our time that we used to have. In retirement is that perfect balance where we have a lot of our time and a lot of our money together, and we really have to figure out what that looks like. And so when you're in your 40s, when you're really saying I'm about 20 years to retirement, some may want to retire at 50, so you're 10 years for retirement, or whatever that number looks like, it ends up being the make or break time because it's very reasonable to put a plan together that you can achieve in 20 years. Like, hey, you know what? Let's invest a certain percentage of our money. 20 years, that's definitely doable. It becomes reasonable to put even a 10-year plan together as long as we don't have a lot of overhead expenses, right? Like it's very reasonable. But when you're someone that's like, I have to put a 5-year plan together, it becomes much more difficult. And I find that we end up getting caught up in those foolishness where people are promising high returns and no risk and all this other stuff. And it's crazy when you say, I can put a 20-year plan together, and most people balk at that. 20 years, what do I want 20 years for? But if you had a 20-year plan that you started at 25 and you could be done at 45, how many people do you know retired at 45? No, many people retire at 45. If you were 30 and put a 20-year plan together, how many people do you know retired at 50? And again, the number isn't as large as we make it seem. When we're like, oh, 20 years, that's too long. Well, I don't know. The majority of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. the numbers show the majority of people retiring today, that people that have 5,000 or less, they consider that retiring broke. They say the majority of Americans are retiring broke. And so for me, when I'm sitting here in my mind, I'm like, no, 20 years is very doable, it's very reasonable, and it's a good plan. Now, do we have the ability to leverage along the way? Of course we do. It depends on our risk tolerance and a whole bunch of variety of factors. But as far as just not knowing much about people, if you were able to tell me, hey, I have 20 years to retirement, in my heart of hearts, I feel like you could put a plan together and achieve that goal and exactly what that looks like. So in this particular plan, then we'll go through some of the strategies that we put in place. So let's go through the case study real quick. So we mentioned that we had 64,000, we have 45 in savings and 19 in joint. It's nice to have the savings amount. I often look at that as a sign to tell me whether or not we're comfortable investing. That if our, let's say you have an emergency fund, and I think it's like 3 to 6 months is what we sort of stay on average. If you have 1 year, 2 years, 3 years of your annual salary in savings, in my mind, you obviously have too much because when you're talking about inflation, you're not keeping up with it. And if you're not keeping up with inflation, that means you're losing money every single year. And the way that we normally look at it, high level, every 20 years, you would need to have doubled your money to afford the exact same lifestyle, which I know sounds crazy, right? Double my money. But you can recall, and my dad, when you talk about walking to the corner store and spending a nickel or a pack of cookies and a soda. And I would be like, what? I remember when I was a kid and my parents would drive around and they would spend $1 per gallon on gas. And then even when I was in college, it was like two something. And then, now it's like 3 to 5. But you can see that even in that short amount of time, we're talking about things like gas and energy doubling, tripling. There are little studies and they put them together where you can see the price of a Big Mac or the price of a Chick-fil-A sandwich. You can see that that price has gone up steadily over time. So if you're someone who's retired and you maintain the exact same amount of money, while it's great to feel like you're not putting your money at risk, your money is definitely at risk because you have to keep up with inflation. Otherwise, none of us would have to invest. Why even worry about the risk of losing my money if I could just save it and be totally fine? And the reality is we can't save it and be totally fine. So that's normally a tell where worst case scenario, I'm like, look, you have to put it somewhere. Even if you just put it in a 5 year CD, that's better than leaving it in your savings account and getting like a 1%, less than 1% return. So for the loan, we have the student loans that we saw, we have the mortgage that is left. They have the property value about 800,000, and then we have about 1.5 million for their term life insurance. It doesn't show the amounts because it's not a permanent. And we'll go through some of the strategies that we put in place for them. When it comes to income, and we'll get started on that. You can see that for James, we have 150,000 a year. For Sarah, we have 130,000 a year. James works as an orthopedic surgeon. Sarah works at a VP of a fintech company, right? Financial technology company. And we're in our 40s and we're trying to figure out how do we get started without having anything in place. And so when it comes to their investments, we basically started with, all right, high level, you should be able to put at least 20% of your salary towards your retirement. Because remember, the trade-off is I'm going to purchase all of my time back so that I don't have to deal with the foolishness if I don't want to. And if you don't want to deal with the foolishness, right? The Bible says, oh, no man, nothing but love, right? And then we'll sit there and we'll say, well, how do you do that? Is that not, in my opinion, is that not asking you to be able to achieve financial freedom, to be able to retire successfully? Is that not what we're saying when we say, oh, and no man, nothing but love, to have essentially no debt? And you really have to take a step back and say, all right, well, how do I do that? And one of my favorite financial, I would say, financial starter books is The Richest Man in Babylon. I enjoy that book a lot. And it has maybe 5, 6 parables, and it talks about purchasing your time back and the idea that you should be able to invest 1/5 of your money to pay yourself. That every time you spend your money, you're paying someone, and then that person then with your money has the opportunity to change their life. But when the money's in your hand, and the numbers say that even someone with a high school diploma that over the life, they will have over $1 million that comes in and out of their hands. That someone with a college degree will have about $3 million over their life committed in and out of their hands. So the question isn't about the money, it's what we do with it. And so for them, we said, all right, the goal is 20% as the starting place. Because if you invest 20% of your salary, so Monday's paycheck, you pay yourself, and then you can spend Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on the current life. And so that number, when you look at their matches and different things, so we said, all right, that's 25,000 for you. And then your employer matches 3%, 100%. And then another 4%, they'll match 50% of that, which means you could have up to 5%. And then for Sarah, she just had the 3% match. Now it's $20,000 for her. We added a Roth. I'm big on having tax-free income when you're retired, because if you really think about it, your retirement income, us achieving the number, it's three levers. It's how much I put in, how much I need to spend to maintain my lifestyle, and how long I have until I retire. So when you're thinking about these numbers, sometimes we can lower your taxes, and that increases how much money is in your pocket. Sometimes we can increase how much we invest. Sometimes we can change our lifestyle. We can move to a lower cost of living state or even a lower cost of living country. And that's what a lot of people do when you see people moving from New York to Florida and hang out here with me. If you have a regular salary in New York, you could probably live pretty well in Florida with that exact same salary because of the cost of living. And then if you're in Florida, you might move to like Alabama or Louisiana, right? Yeah, probably. And you may be able to do that. And so when you look at the cost of living, there's different states that work with your plan where we may not have the money. Well, if we move or we downsize, or we may make some other adjustments. You sort of get what I'm saying. You want to be creative when it comes to being able to achieve those retirement goals. And so for them, we said, all right, let's do the matches in our 401k. Let's start in the HSA account, which they were like, this is great. What do you like about it? And I was like, well, health expenses is what we all have. As far as living, I know one of the sayings is like you have like death and taxes and stuff like that is guaranteed. I think health expenses are guaranteed too, that you're gonna have something over your life. And I remember when I had retired from corporate America, and I had no idea how to generate an income outside of actively working. And after a very short amount of time, I realized I did not have enough money because my money wasn't generating an income for me. And so I didn't put my money to work. And then you had your healthcare expenses still need to pay for. And I cut those quarters. And that was definitely not the best decision. And so a lot of times we have to put a plan in place that maintains our health insurance, or we can see a doctor and ask questions and things like that. We also added a taxable account. Very fancy way of saying that this is money that you have received in your account and then you invest it after that. And the benefit of having a taxable account is that gives you access, as long as it's invested for a year and a day at least, it gives you access to capital gains, which is a much more favorable tax rate than your traditional income. The money inside your 401k, that's going to be taxed as normal income. It went in tax deductible. So it means that you didn't pay taxes on it when it went in. It did not count as income, as taxable income. It grows tax deferred. So you didn't pay taxes on it each year that the account grew. But when you take it out, it does get taxed as normal income. Uncle Stan said, "No, I'm not playing anymore. You have to pay taxes at least once on this." Your health savings account, on the other hand, is the nice one because if you have healthcare expenses, they can go through the entire process without you ever paying taxes on it, which is great. Like if you really think about it, you're telling me that I don't have to pay Uncle Sam taxes ever? And I'm like, yes, you don't have to pay him ever, as long as it's in that health savings account because you put the money in tax deductible, so it didn't count as income, and then it grows tax deferred, so you didn't pay tax on the growth each year. As long as you spend it on healthcare expenses in retirement, it comes out tax free. That's pretty nice. Now, there are some small tidbits. So one of the things I'll mention to you without going into all the details is when you activate your Medicare, you cannot put money inside of your HSA anymore. They're just written where they don't talk to each other. They're not friends. And so you will generally kind of want to know that. So we have the Roth. That's the money that's going to be tax-free income in retirement. We have both of them. You're allowed to contribute up to $8,000 as long as your income is within a certain amount. And then if your income goes over that amount, you're not allowed to contribute in it, but you'll see what we did and you end up doing backdoor Roth. And so we'll talk about that a little bit too. Right. And then of course, as far as goals, the goal that we have, and then we'll see as far as your retirement, when you think about the things that you want to do in retirement, what do you want to do with your time? Do you want to travel? Do you want to spend time with family? Do you want to get back into some hobbies that you used to have? Me, I love puzzles. I love puzzles a lot. So I would imagine that when everybody's gone, that I'll probably go back to doing puzzles because I used to do puzzles even when my kids were first born, and they would take the pieces. And I'm not a very nice person when my puzzle is missing pieces. And so I said, you know what, Dre, you should just take a break from the puzzles because it's not working for you, and the kids are getting nervous about it. So I had taken a break. I do puzzles periodically with my kids, and I'm okay if the pieces are gone. It's just the experience. But I would like to go back to just putting all my puzzles together and later on in time. So I will do that. So our retirement age is 65. We have about 20 years, so that's definitely doable. We have our monthly expenses there currently, and this amount doesn't include your mortgage because we don't want to double count it. But our monthly expenses will be about $6,000 in retirement, and it's currently about 8,500 currently now. And then our healthcare expenses, we take the national average. And then, of course, most people want to travel some, and their particular lifestyle and the places they wanted to go would be roughly 8,000 a year. Yeah, one of the things you'll notice is we always account for inflation. And the reason we do that is because $8,000 this year, right? If you were to add another 3% onto that, will not be $8,000 next year for the exact same trip. And I know you and I, we've all gone places, we've all shopped, and you'll see $8,000 this year. A 3% increase means that that exact same trip will be $8,240 next year. And then it goes up by that 3% every year. It's compounding against us. And it's important that you are calculating the amounts that you're going to spend based on that fact. Because if you don't consider it, what ends up ultimately happening is you're generating an income for $8,000 a year, and the trip 10 years into your retirement costs 1,200 or $12,000. And so we always want to keep track of that. We have cooking classes at 1,200. We have the learning an instrument at 2,500. You want to donate to their local congregation, that was 10,000 a year. And then their cars right now are free and clear. So we just have placeholders that says if we have to get a new car. In my mind, it's good to plan for all of these situations so that way you can make the adjustments ultimately if you need to later on in retirement. And then we will move towards their overall investments. So when you're dealing with market volatility, there's a couple approaches that you could take as far as giving you peace of mind. And most of them have to do with the way that you allocate your money. If you allocate your money in a way that helps you deal with that, then you're normally going to be okay. And so one of the more simple portfolios that's normally a good place to start where I don't have a lot of risk and I'm prepared for most situations, it's going to be called the permanent portfolio. It probably averages about sort of between like 5 to 7% depending on what these sectors are doing. And as a result, you're definitely able to say, okay, I know that if we're in times of high inflation, I have a portion of my allocation towards gold. If I have times of deflation, I have long-term bonds. If I have times of economic growth, I have my portion towards stocks. And if I'm in if I'm in a recession, I have cash. And so you may have seen Warren Buffett, I think he said he had $244 billion in cash currently because he's stacking the money because he's waiting for a sale. And when you're someone that has a plan in place, you're very comfortable in a recession. That even though there's market volatility in a recession, you know how you're going to turn this money and make it into more money. And that I often will say, no matter what the economic climate, there's someone who's going to win in every environment. There's someone who's going to make more money than they've ever made in a recession. And then there's someone who will lose in every environment. There's someone that's going to lose everything and file for bankruptcy in the times of immense economic growth. So it's not the circumstances or the situation, it's the plan and whether executing on the plan. And for them, we are able to achieve their goals with the permanent portfolio. I generally wouldn't go much more conservative than that. But if you're someone who is a little uncomfortable in the stock market, it's definitely a great place to start. You start building confidence and understanding, and then you can adjust the allocations in a way that works for you. For the average person, one of those rules that we give is whatever age is, you want to have that percentage allocated in the stock market, minus like 100%, obviously. So, for example, in this one, we are 40 years old. So we will take 100 minus 40, and that means 60%. So 60% of your money should be allocated in the stock market. Then you have 40% allocated in something that is more protective. And then, for someone who is maybe like 20 years old, then 100 minus 20 would be 80. And so we're saying that they should have 80% of their money allocated in the stock market in some way, and then 20% of their money safe. Now, it's not a one-for-one rule. Obviously, if you're 90 years old, you shouldn't necessarily have 90% safe and then 10% invested in the stock market. But it is just a gauge. It just lets you know if you're roughly too conservative or if you're too aggressive, just as a general gauge. Does that make sense? Yeah, hopefully that does. So with that information, let's go through and I'll show you the plan. So we were able to open this up. I'll zoom in a little bit. All right. So we were able to maintain them retiring at 65. So that worked fine for them. We have the expenses. So that's the same. We didn't have to pull that lever either. You can see that we started those investments that we mentioned to them. Hey, this is how we're going to start allocating our money and start building it. And then you move over to the plan. We give them the permanent portfolio. We say, hey, let's start, get our feet wet, get comfortable on the market, and we won't have as much volatility. So you don't get spooked out of the market. But keep in mind that we are a little bit more conservative than maybe typically have to be. But that's okay because we're just getting in the game. We're just getting the our mind around the idea of investing our money and the need to be able to do that. We're going to start Social Security when they retire at 65. You can start as early as 62. Generally, if you're still working, that doesn't normally make sense for most people. Or you can wait until 70 and you get about an 8% increase in the income that you receive. But that works for some, doesn't work for others. I know a lot of people there are like, well, Dre, I know someone who had died the day after they retired. And that's fair, right? Obviously it happens. But I would always challenge that thought with how many people do you know that are still alive after the day they retired? And the reality is when people retire and they're still alive, they don't call us. Yeah, we only get called if it's a funeral. So we have a bias, we have a discomfort. There's like, oh, I remember that one person. And I'm like, yeah, but the reality is most of the people that you know are going to be alive past that. And that is true. It's a risk. You're obviously gambling that you'll live long enough. It's normally about 12 years is how long it would take for someone to wait till 70 and make back what they lost on that additional income. It's not about 10 to 12 years. So you have to look at your health. You have to look at the other streams of income that you have. It's a lot that goes into that decision. It's not right for everyone, but I am saying that it shouldn't just be a decision that's based off of, well, I knew someone that had died the day after they retired, so I'm going to take mine at 62, something like that. I don't think that that's the way we should think about it. So then if they had, we just left it at the current payments. And then the tax strategy, we went through a couple of them and we are able to make some overall changes. And I'll show you what that looks like. We actually left it at current. So we'll change it to the tax proposal. We'll see what that does while it's adjusting. So it increased the amount of money that they had, and I'll show you what that looks like. They didn't have any education expenses as far as for future children, so we're just making the payments on the ones that they currently have. And then your retirement spending, there are lots of choices on that. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll say, all right, well, how about we just have inflation adjusted? It just means that whatever you're spending, we increase it by 3% every single year. And that one is going to be probably the most conservative. So that would give you the largest ability to be like, all right, I'm good in that. I'm good in most environments. Most people have a spending smile. It's a very fancy way of saying that when I first retire, I'm enjoying myself. I am spending a lot of money. And I'm traveling and I'm doing everything. And then at some point we start spending less. So it goes from the high amount to the lower amount. That's the bottom of the spiral. And then it normally starts increasing later on. That is the increase of the spiral. And what ends up happening for most of us is we have to go to the doctor a little bit more often. And so that expense ends up increasing for us a little bit later. And there are lots of different examples of the retirement spending spiral. I know I probably can find one online and just share it with you real quick. Let's see. Yeah. So Morgan Stanley has one. So I will share that one with you real quick. So we'll share this tab. It's all right. So you can see what we're saying is we're saying like, hey, it's a smile. There it goes down and it goes up. Early in my years, I spent my most money. And then I've kind of traveled, I've golfed, I've done everything. Life is okay. I'm chillaxing, spending time with my family, writing my book, checking it off my bucket list. So we start spending less. We get tired of being stuck in the airport. I like sleeping in my bed. I'm not interested in the hotel anymore. And we spend less around the middle of retirement. And then later in retirement, we start spending more again. And most of the time, that is on healthcare expenses. Most of the time, that as we go to the doctor more often, and those expenses, as your healthcare expenses increase by about like 6%, which is kind of crazy. But your healthcare definitely outpaces inflation. And so you do, as far as healthcare, that's one of the bigger considerations. That do I have enough money to make sure that you see that even though we started at 45 with nothing, then what we did is we have a savings rate of 23%. And as I tell you, most of the time, if you are someone who's willing to save for 10, 15, 20 years, and you're willing to put at least 20% of your salary away, you most likely will have over $1 million in your retirement account, and you most likely be able to retire and afford your lifestyle for most people. And so they're at 23%, went from not starting 45, kind of late, not too late, 23%. And that ends up being 64,000 a year across the board. And then the salaries is 280, and then they're able to maintain the lifestyle. Naturally, if you have a lower lifestyle, then you can go less. If you have a large lifestyle, then you may need to go more. But we were able to make the magic happen, take advantage of the match, and then we put the strategies in place for them. And they were definitely excited to be able to do that. And I'll show you what the tax considerations look like, because what ends up happening, and you'll see it almost all the time, is if I have most of my money going into my retirement accounts, that means it hasn't been taxed yet. And if it hasn't been taxed yet, that means it's going to be taxed at normal income when I retire. And some things that we always have to consider is required minimum distributions, which is a very fancy way of saying that Uncle Sam at some point says, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I've been waiting for you to take the money out so you can pay taxes on it. For whatever reason, you haven't taken the money out. I don't know if you just had good money management. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to require you to take money out going forward. Which you and I would go, well, why would you do that? Uncle Sam, I'm not using it. Uncle Sam's like, I want the tax revenue. And so Uncle Sam will say, you have to start taking it out. Or there's a little calculation, nothing too crazy. You just look up your year, it gives you a number, you divide the amount that's in your pre-tax accounts by that number, it tells you how much you have to take out that year. And you say, well, Drew, what happens if I don't do it? I'm glad you asked. There's a 25% tax penalty. So whatever the amount you're supposed to take out, they will tax you a 25% penalty on the amount you didn't take out. So for most people, they're like, well, dang, if I'm going to just give it to Uncle Sam, I might as well take it out. And that's what a lot of people end up doing. Ideally, if you're able to get ahead of this, give yourself a little flexibility or a plan, you're able to put a plan in place today that says, all right, I'm going to spread that tax liability out. So that way I'm not later in retirement taking out huge amounts of money, because most of my money is in that taxable account. And for a lot of people, that's something that we just don't think about a lot, because back in the day, we used to have taxes in there. It was upwards of like 90% of your income could be taxed. I don't know, like 90% tax rate, but there was a scale and up to 90% fell into the scale. And you would end up paying taxes on that. So for most people, that old strategy was easy. All right, I'll defer my taxes. Duh. But in today's world, we have staggered brackets. It's really hard to move between brackets. And so a lot of times you're deferring taxes, and you may pay higher taxes in retirement. Yeah, because the government is always trying to figure out what to do to get the money instead of them necessarily focusing on spending as much. And so we do want to be mindful of that. Is it a slam dunk for me to defer my taxes on my income? And it will definitely be lower. I don't know if it'll definitely be lower. All right, so let's go through. We'll go through what that strategy looks like for them. And so you can see here about what we did, and I'm going to go through it with you. In this particular situation, I always tell you, when it comes to Roth conversions and things like that, where I pay the taxes now and I save myself later, it always depends where the money is at to know whether we should do it and at what point should we activate it. In this particular plan, based on the income that they had, it made most sense for them anytime that they were below a 32% tax bracket to do the conversions. And so we would do the conversions each time. The money that we put in, we always tried to fill up the Roth first, or tax-free accounts first. Then we did the taxable accounts. So we had access to the capital gains accounts, and then we had the tax deferred accounts. When we withdrew the money out, we withdrew the money out of our taxable accounts first. So we were living off of our capital gains in the beginning. And then we were able to move into our tax-free and our tax deferred accounts. We're able to move a lot of this money into our tax-free income along the way. And what ends up happening is now you're not required to take those required minimum distributions out. And then when you do have required minimum distributions, because that is the last amount of money that you touch, that now is the smallest amount of money. So whenever you have those, you probably were living off a higher amount than that required minimum distribution. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility and control. And so you can see here what we ended up being able to change for them is we're able to generate 2.8 million more in tax adjusted ending balance. So they have another $3 million of what they would have had if they just did the traditional same amount out of each account. And then we're able to pay almost $1 million less in taxes, about $509,000 less in taxes. And then that left them with an additional 4.7 million that they did not have to withdraw from their account. And based on how much they need, we didn't change what the withdrawal amount was. We changed the requirement of those withdrawal amounts. And so you can see that actually was the biggest changer for them. And then you're able to make those adjustments along the way. And what that would visually look like in a couple ways that I could probably show you what I do with that little pin. Right. There it is. High level, what we're basically saying here, and I'll show you what that looks like, is we're basically saying, oh, maybe I can get rid of this little great. What we're basically saying is you have two choices. So normally you have your money in your 401k, and to make the math easy for me, let's say you have 100k inside of there. And when you retire, so it's up to 150k. We'll just say that, right? Make the math easy for me. You will then pay whatever your tax rate is on this amount, your normal tax rate. And so probably for most of you, we'll say that that's like 22%. So that's what your taxes are going to be on that amount. And then you'll take the money out as you go along. The issue that ends up happening is when we reach, I believe 73 now, and you have your RMDs, it might require you to take out large amounts of the money that you would not spend because you have income and all these other streams, you have less debt, you're slowing down on the traveling, and yet you're required to take the amount out. So instead of you having these tax events where it's all in one lump sum, right? So that's like one lump sum. Ideally, what we would do is we would say, all right, let's say from 60 to okay, well I actually messed that up. So we're actually say from 60 to or I should say from 60 to 70. So I'll have to fix that amount because it's annoying me. All right. So let me see if I can find where I back it up. Okay. All right. Good. All right. So we'll say from 60 to 70, instead of it being $100,000 or $150,000 on one day at the end, what I could do is I could take out $15,000 every single year. Every single year. I take out $50,000 over 10 years. So I have emptied out the amount, and now I'm paying possibly, let's just say worst case scenario, I'm paying the exact same amount in taxes. So I'm going to pay my 22% every year. So it does add up to the exact same amount of taxable income, but I'm paying it each year. And so now I'm able to adjust it. Realistically, what will happen for most people is you will actually not bump yourself into a higher tax bracket. So what ends up happening for most people is a required amount of distributions bumps you into a higher tax bracket. And now you're paying at a higher tax rate. So instead of it actually being 22, it may have been like 32%, right? So it may have been the 32%. And now that you're adjusting it out each year, now you're at the 22%. So you save on that amount. And because you've already moved to tax-free income, now in retirement, you don't have any taxes, which is the goal. In retirement, we want most of our money to be in our hands. We worked hard for it. We don't want all the same bothering us, telling us how much we have to take out, paying taxes here. So we have it already set up. And now it's all in your Roth. So now we pay taxes on it each year. Uncle Sam is happy. We still pay taxes on it. He's not mad. He's not waiting to figure out when we're going to use the money. He's like, great, we pay taxes on it. You convert it to a Roth. I'm okay with that. You gave me my taxable income. You're retired. You're happy. I'm happy. We're all happy. And so that's why it ends up working really well for a lot of us. Now we do want to always be mindful of it, of course, because it is different for each person depending on where the money is at, whether you actually save or not. But every time I discuss planning with you guys, I am 100% on the idea of flexibility. I don't want to be forced to do anything that I don't want to do. And that's just me. So for me, getting the same tax bill, even worst case scenario, is the exact same taxes. The idea that I can pay it each year over time, I think that would be better. Now, things that you do want to consider is okay, well, Social Security and Medicare especially, they're going to look at my income and they're going to see what it is on these last 2 years. They have a 2 year look back. So you may have to start it before that 2 year look back and stop it during the 2 year look back and then keep it back up after that. You may have to do that to make sure you don't accidentally increase your Medicare premiums because you took out a bunch of money. Where you'll see that people will be like, oh, I'm going to remodel my entire house. Okay, so you take out a large amount of money, and that's all income, and that's one of your Medicare years. Where Uncle Sam is looking at you like, okay, you're balling, and you're like, no, 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 Uncle Sam, that's not what happened. Uncle Sam's like, well, the number said that's exactly what happened. So of course you have to be mindful of what that looks like on those look back years, and we just always want to keep that kind of stuff in mind. So for this plan, this worked very well for them, and then that gave us 89% chance of probability of success. So we went from having $0 in the account. I can show you what that looks like. Right, you can see right here, 44, we had nothing, put the first 64,000 in, and then we were able to maintain that and grow the account. And then at the end, it says, hey, best case scenario, you'll have $9 million. Worst case scenario, or actually best case scenario, you have 20 million or $20 million. And worst case scenario, you have zero. That's a 5% chance. It's highly improbable that every stock you pick is a winner and every stock you pick is a loser. Highly unlikely. And then that middle 50%, you can see it says, well, that would be somewhere between 2 to 10 million. And you and I would say, well, that's a pretty big range. I know. I understand. And then you calculate, extrapolate the numbers, and that gives you a median of 5 million. So we should have 5 million left over. And then that would maintain their lifestyle. They have the comfort in retirement. What that means ultimately is if you don't have heirs and generational wealth isn't on the plan, we can pull back. We can say, you know what, we don't have to put all this money away, even though that's a great starting place. We can look and pull back on the amounts. We can stop investing in certain things. We can start retirement earlier in the sense that you may look at that and say, well, I don't feel like retiring at 65 or more. You know what, Dre, I'm done working now at 55. And we can look at that. I'm done at 60. Also, we can look at that. That you don't have to say, well, I got all this money and I can't take it with me. It's true, right? The Egyptians tried that. It didn't work out for them. But it's to say that I'm building my confidence. I can see that it's definitely possible. It starts off slow, but as my money starts compounding, as I allow my money to grow, it does work out in my favor. We just have to keep investing and allowing our money to grow. And that's why we started on a very simple permanent portfolio. Ideally, we would be able to invest a little bit more. And you can see that we ended up being able to get them an additional $7 million, right? Just from being able to invest the money. If you did not invest it, you can see that even though they would just put the money in their savings account, it would have been gone at like 79, right? Because you have to be able to outpace inflation. If you don't outpace inflation, it's no good. And that's kind of what this future dollars amount will show you. And then we end up adjusting those. Really nothing for you to see on the back end. But what we'll do is it just changes the numbers where your lifestyle this year was, hey, it's $100,000. I've already told you that doubles every 20 years on average with a 3% increase every year. Well, that means that in 20 years, that it would be 200,000 that I would need. That mortgages have doubled. You and I would say, yeah, I'm true. Mortgage that car payments have doubled. Yeah, I don't remember car payments ever being this high. To the point now that they're offering 6, 7 year terms on car payments because that's what inflation does. And because of that, we can't just leave our money in a savings account. We have to be very mindful of where we're putting the money so that we can achieve the overall goals. And so, again, hopefully you're able to find value in this. If you have any additional questions, you can place them in the comments. I'll answer them. If not, then as always, I'm thankful for the time. And if you wanted to be able to see some of the additional information, I didn't sometimes I place them in there. You can always go to obsidianwisdom.com/wealthy. If you have a particular situation that you would like to see me model, you can I can either give you the template, you can fill it out, and then I'll have your name on it. I can put the plan together. You can see what I would do if I was managing your money, and then you can do that. You can run the play. Or you could just give me the general information. I can just say, all right, based on living in this state with this pension and these amounts, I can tell you what that looks like. But the main thing and the most important thing that hopefully you recognize is the start money is on my or time is on my side, but it doesn't mean if I start late that there's no chance for me. There's always the possibility. Small changes that we can make, but we can always achieve the goals. Start small and build up from there. And then from there you should be able to achieve all of the overall goals. And so we want to have looking back 45 for this particular one, where do you want to only invest 20%? It is the make or break. We normally have to start making something, even if it's just 5% and taking care of the match. We don't have to jump up to 20%. But for a lot of people, you're making more, your kids are starting to leave the house, you have more disposable income, and then it's like, what am I going to do with that money? Am I going to live for the day or am I going to invest it for my future self? Is my future self going to look back and be happy with the decisions I made? Or are they going to be shaking their head at the decisions I made? And so when you invest the money, we always have to think about inflation because inflation is real. And whether or not we talk about it, it's happening. And then, of course, market volatility. Ideally, most of us were able to leave our money in the market in a long term approach because the market goes up over the long term. And most of the time we lose money, it's because we're trying to time the market instead of spending time in the market. And then smart investment strategies, we went through that from a tax perspective, and then just the action plan to get started today. If you do those things, yeah, I feel very confident that you'll be able to have a successful retirement and be within the top 20% of people who are very happy in their retirement. And then we got to work on you being comfortable spending the money. There are people in retirement that are just uncomfortable spending the money. And I would say that sometimes we just invest the money, but we don't necessarily have a plan to know how good we are. Like, and that's one of the reasons I try to show these models to you, because you feel different when you're like, oh, I'm gonna have, that much left over. Okay, right. Now I should probably spend a little bit more. That I probably could do a little bit more. And I don't want you sitting there at the end of your retirement where you're like, man, I mean, I could have did so much more. Like, I would like us to be able to see the goals, have the plan, see the money, and be like, yeah, that's actually very doable. And I feel comfortable spending the money. As always, again, I am thankful for your time together. If you have any questions, I am here for you. Go to obsidianwisdom.com. And until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.